Tasting Climate Change wishes to thank all of the sponsors supporting the conference. This specific seminar is made possible by the moderator for this seminar is Michel Bouffard. Michel is the founder of Tasting Climate Change, an author, a wine educator, and a journalist. She recently co-wrote a book called Quel vin pour demain, which was published last September by Duno. The book explores solutions for the wine industry to adapt and mitigate climate change.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third day of Tasting Climate Change. I'm actually not in studio today. I am at Texum in Dallas. I presented yesterday with Pascaline Lepelletier, Laura Catena, and Gillian Endelman. We did a panel discussion on climate change, and I received a lot of emails from you and texts from you and messages asking where you could watch it. It was actually not part of this series, but if you go to Pascaline Instagram, we decided to use our phone yesterday in the room to actually do a live. And so you can see, if you go to Instagram, Pascaline Lepelletier, you will be able to see the Instagram live that we recorded and have access to it. Today, we're talking about indigenous grapes. With climate change, often there's a lot of discussions around grapes. Which grapes are the future? Lots of regions are exploring new solutions. Sometimes we talk about hybrids. The thing though, there's a lot of already existing grapes that can be the solution. There's 6,000 grapes currently. The OIV declares that there's about 6,000 grapes. Of those 6,000 grapes, 13 of them equal to 1/3 of the world's vineyard. And from that, 33 cover half of the world's vineyard, meaning there's a lot of already existing grapes that we can explore before we go to new grapes. And I am so excited today. I could not think of a better panel to talk about that. We have researcher from all over the world, and we could have a full day of seminar with each of them. So you're going to leave after an hour and a half saying, I wish I had more time. I'm the same, but the idea today is just to hopefully at least get you thinking, and then you can go and search further and read some of the things that they have published. Just a few things to remember. If you have questions during the seminar, you can use the chat button. I'm going to vet the questions and ask your question at the end and throughout the seminar. If you want to talk about us, Instagram is Tasting Climate Change, #Tasting Climate Change. So with me today, Thomas Dormegnies. Thomas works at the nursery called Lilian Berillon. At the last edition of Climate Change, Lilian was actually in Montreal, so you might have met him. Thomas graduated from the Ingénieur Agronome de Rennes School in the Plant Selection and Improvement and Enology Viticulture program in Montpellier. Thomas has been a vine selection specialist in vine nurseries for 18 years. He wanders the old world of France and Europe and is in the search of the largest genetic diversity possible. From the multiplied international varieties to modest or forgotten grapes. When I wrote the book, I had a lot of discussion with Thomas and Lilian, and actually do some of the work with them they are located in the Rhone Valley, but they work all over Europe. And it will be interesting, to talk about how they actually making sure that we explore all of those grapes that already exist. From Geisenheim University, I have Dr. KHALIL NADER. I hope I said that right. He's a researcher at Geisenheim University in Germany. In 2004, he completed the Vitis Vinifera Euromaster program for viticulture and enology. And then he enrolled in a joint graduate program between Geisenheim and the University of Bordeaux in France. And he obtained his PhD in 2019. His research focused on the age of grapevines and the potential differences between old and young grapevines in physiology and wine quality. Of course, a topic of increasing interest in the wine industry. And he will be presenting along with him Professor Dr. MANFRED STOLL of Geisenheim. Is the head of the Department of General and Organic Viticulture at Geisenheim University. After completing his PhD at University of Adelaide, he received a postdoctoral fellowship at Dundee, studying plant ecophysiology and remote sensing. His specific areas of research in viticulture includes ecophysiology, remote and proxy sensing, vineyard adaptation and grapevine interaction to environmental stressor, and the impact of climate change on current and future production. So today together, I'm really fascinated by the research because they've studied how whole vine Riesling in Germany adapt to climate change. And also a project that's extremely fascinating is called the FACE program. And so they're observing how the plant, how Riesling and Cabernet Sauvignon is reacting under elevated CO2 in the atmosphere. So extremely interesting. Then we have Gonzaga SANTESTEBAN. Gonzaga, he is devoted to intermingling research, teaching, and transference in viticulture. He currently works at the Head Department of Agronomy, Biotechnology, and Food Science at the Universidad Pública de Navarra in Spain. He's also the academic head of the Master of Innovative Enology, bringing his 20 plus years of experience to teaching to undergraduate and postgraduate. So today with Gonzaga, we're going to explore indigenous grapes in Spain, the future of those grapes. And also he took part of a really interesting research program called Adviclim. So it's going to search some of that with us as well. Marta actually started her life in pharmacy. She studied pharmacy in Barcelona, but love brought her to wine, and then she went on and studied a biodynamic agriculture master between 2012 and 2014. So today, Paris Balta, as a result, is Demeter certified. She actually she teaches biodynamic rules and philosophy in different courses and viticulture school all over Spain and also at Barcelona University. And Paris Balta do a lot of work and insight in terms of using and putting forward indigenous grapes in Spain. So as you say, we have an amazing panel. They're the experts, so I'm going to let him speak and I will be vetting your question. So Thomas is actually in Saint-Emilion right now. He's working with some producers there, and we've had a little connection problem and it's not quite stable. So what we are going to do to make sure that we don't lose him, he's going to show his power presentation. But Thomas, we're going to ask you to turn off your camera so that we can actually hear you throughout your presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I am in Bordeaux in Saint-Emilion in the hotel. That's why the connection is not so good. I'm going to speak about climate change and material, vegetal material, because for the past 15 years, as breeder, we are a witness of a strong decline in the vineyard with significant mortality of the vine in the vineyard. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see here a vineyard with a lot of vines which are dead, and it looks like it's a war battle. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so the vineyard is mostly affected by 3 or 4 biotic factors. The first one is a leaf hopper, which is a flavescence dorée, and 73% of the vineyard is under control area, which means that it might be contaminated, and 58% of the vineyard is infected. The second one is trunk disease caused by mushrooms, fungus, and 40% of the vineyard in France is infected. And the third one is fan leaf, cornmeal in French. 2/3 of the vineyard is contaminated or mostly contaminated. And with all the disease, we say that more than 10% or around 13% of the vineyard became unproductive because of wood disease in 15 years, since 15 years. And it's around 5 hectoliters, 500 liters per hectare, which are lost in the yield directly due to the decline. Next slide. The causes of this evil, we call it evil, we can say that the viticulture practices might be in cause, and because people are working, they develop mechanization, they use a lot of pesticide and so on. So it's one of the cause of the mortality in the vineyard. The second one might be the vegetal material quality. We use more and more clones, either in Vitis vinifera, which is the upper part of the plant, or in the rootstocks. The third cause might be the business model, which promote the intensive practice in the vineyard. And all those factors are accentuated by the climate change. Next slide, please. So what is our alternatives? What we decided to do? We decided to improve the quality of the vegetal in order to face the climate change and to obtain what we want. It's century-old vines, century-old planting. So we are dealing with, next slide, please. We are dealing with, as Michel say, intervarietal erosion. What is intervarietal erosion? We have more than 6,000 varieties in the world, but only the 7 most multiplied varieties represent more than 60% of plant produced by nurserymen. So it leads to intervarietal genetic erosion. The second one is, as I said, we are people are more and more using clonal selection. So they are planting only one number of each variety. So it's what we call intravarietal genetic erosion. Next slide. Another one, sorry. Okay, so what is clonal selection? Just to be brief and to be more clear, the clonal selection is you choose in the vineyard just one single vine, and then you multiply it infinitely. This only one individual, and you plant it everywhere in the world. So it's what we call the intervarietal genetic erosion. What we are doing, it's massal selection. Massal selection, we choose in old vineyard a lot, as much as possible, old vines coming from different areas, different vineyards, and we multiply them in the nursery, in our nursery. And it makes us able to maintain diversity in the vineyard. As you see, there are a lot of colors in the vineyard down in the right part of the slide. It's a way of conserving genetic diversity. Next slide, please. So here you can see one of our breeder, which put a mark on an old vine. And we multiply, we make tests, virologic tests for leaf roll and fan leaf. And individuals which are virus-free, we plant them in our collection on the bottom left part of the slide. So we have just right now more than 5,000 unique individuals of 55 different varieties. And it represents around 12 hectares of mother vine of Vitis vinifera. The second, this is for Vitis vinifera. And after, we have also a lack of diversity with rootstocks. So we have decided to increase our diversity of rootstock. Next slide, please. By planting our own mother vines of rootstocks. We have 33 hectares of rootstocks, which are trellised. It's not grown on the soil, as most of nurserymen do in France. So it's a better quality for us. And we have 21 varieties of rootstocks in our collections. We want to increase this number. We want to plant as much as possible rootstocks, and we want to test their adaptability to different regional vineyards, because one of the climate change effect is to decrease the quality of the vineyards, because rootstock are not enough resistant to drought or to high temperature. So we pay a lot of attention to the selection and of new rootstocks which came from all Europe to test their regional adaptability in order to increase the quality of the wine. We are going to make a micro vinification to make sure that the quality of the wine can be preserved in very high quality vineyards. This is for rootstocks, and for Vitis vinifera, we are trying to increase the variability in of the greffon, the variety we sell to our customers, and we do selection in France, but not only in France, but also in Europe. Actually, I work a lot in Spain and in Portugal, just to see if we can find new varieties that can be suitable to our climate or to our terroir in France, because we're suffering a lot of the climate change. For instance, Chardonnay, which is emblematic variety in France, it's difficult now to have a good maturity, because you have too much sugar, not enough acidity, and the wine are not very well balanced, and it's due to the climate change mostly. So our efforts are both for Vitis vinifera and also for rootstocks. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas. Before we move on to the next person, I have a question for you. And we've talked a lot about that before. We've had discussions about hybrids, and I'm asking because next week we're going to have a panel on hybrids, and I love to hear your thought about the new developed grapes, which called the cépage résistant. Why do you think that we don't why are you not a big fan of cépage résistant? Besides, I know we've talked about the taste, you're not a big fan of the taste, but beyond the taste, can you talk about the genetic, why you don't think it's a good solution?
Well, first of all, it's a mistake to call cépage, because cépage is a pure vitis vinifera. It's new varieties with a small part of American or Asian varieties or species. So it's not really cépage as we used to call it in France. We are not a fan of this kind of material because we have, as we say, more than 6,000 cépage all over the world. And we just we use only 7 of them, mostly international varieties. So for us, we have enough diversity, which is not yet explored, not to develop new things we don't know. Well, the quality of the wine is not at the rendezvous. It's low quality for us. It's not enough. We cannot promote those kind of option, because we would rather look to regional varieties, regional cépage. In Portugal, there are a lot, or in Spain, there are a lot. I was in Galicia, or in the north of Portugal. We have a lot of different white varieties or red varieties. I mostly work on white varieties now, but we have a lot which are not yet spread, and without selection, not enough selection. So we start our work of massal selection on those areas in Spain and in Portugal, and to see how it can be a solution, those varieties, there can be a solution to solve the change of climate, this long period of without rain, and because they are more adapted than our Chardonnay or Merlot. I am in Saint-Emilion just right now, and this is the area of Merlot, and it's quite difficult. People are changing the way they are planting more Cabernet Franc, which is a late ripening variety. Because Merlot, it's pick up around 15 degrees now of alcohol without acidity, and the quality of the wine is not is not good, because it's not balanced wine as we used to have 15 years ago, and it makes wine which you cannot keep because of the lack of acidity. So we try to find new alternatives to that. Well, there is also there are more solutions. There is the genetic one, which we are talking about, but there is also the wine makers and wine growers practice that might be changed. People have to discover more less intensive practice in the vineyard, in order to make sure that the vines are in a good are healthy, and that you can also try to use different rootstocks. That's what we are promoting now. New rootstock which are more resistant to drought or to dryness. So we have a lot of different solutions, instead of making a new hybrids, which are not very good, and we don't know their adaptability. For instance, Chenin in Vallée de la Loire, it's like it has been grown since centuries, and it's the well adapted variety for this area. So there are solutions with rootstocks, with wine grower practice to make sure that we can face this climate change?
It's a really interesting point, and often we talk, people often look at the classification, the climate classification. There's a lot of different one. You probably heard of them, like the Winkler, the Euglin, and people look at those to kind of decide which grapes they can plant. But the thing is, it doesn't take into consideration what can be done for the plant to adapt to climate change. So it's something that we have to keep in mind. And last thing before I go to the others, Thomas, you were also explaining to me that the newly developed grapes, often they're what we call like the polygenic. So they're the cépage resistant were created to be resistant to a lot of different diseases, but you were explaining that with time, eventually, it's, the virus or the disease find a way. So it's in the long term, it might not be a solution either.
Yeah. We don't know. We have no background for the resistance. We don't know how long it will keep. It will be, and it's resistant to mildew, but not to black rot, and so on. So it's not the perfect solution for us. We think that working better in the vineyard with very high quality plants from the nursery and so on might be a solution better than new hybrids. We don't really know. It's not adapted to what the viticulture we want, and either to our clients now.
And I always like to say that, the hybrids we've been exploring hybrids since the 19th century, but still today, they only represent 4.4% of the total planting in the world. So, it's never really took off. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do with a nursery like Lilian Berillon and the other speaker will share their research. I think there's a lot of things we can look at before we turn on to those newly developed grapes. Thomas, stay on. We'll be back for the panel discussion. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to have KHALIL and Manfred with me, because when I was writing my book this year, I got lost. I was reading some of the research you did, and also some of the FACE program and research program, and I was fascinated. So I was so excited when you accepted to be part of the panel. So thank you, and look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. KHALIL and myself, we will not talk about indigenous grapes. We will rather focus on the age of grape wines and their impact on physiology and wine quality. So next slide, please. Well, Michelle introduced the program of today, that it is way too short, and the diagram on the right, which is originated from Richard Smart, the flying wine doctor, and Mike Robinson is almost 40 years old. And it basically covers the relationship between soil, climate, and the factor X, what we do in terms of our management practices to basically describe the terroir of our wines. So starting from physical properties in the soil, the texture, the depths of the soil and the water and nutrition content. Of course, climate plays a major role to impact on all features of our plant growth. So starting from radiation, temperature, humidity, and so on. Rainfall, of course, this impacts on the behavior of the plant itself. However, what we do in the field during management practice in terms of managing the soil or the canopy, our training system, and so on. That basically sets the scene to the vigor of our plant. And of course, the amount of foliage, the relationship between the leaf area and fruit weight then finally impacts on the exposure of fruit or leaves, and therefore on the entire vine physiology. And this is the frame we are working on. And next slide, please. What we do observe was in parts mentioned by Thomas before. So there is certainly a loss in biodiversity, a degradation in our landscape, soil erosion, doing harm to our environment. We do have the problems with pesticides and contamination, and we are facing a lower water retention in our soil. This all in all is causing water pollution. And all of that is under the umbrella of basically the climate risk. And therefore, next slide, please. That has certainly an impact not only on the wine quality, but on the wine profile itself. If we go to the next slide, and before I hand over to KHALIL, I would like to mention, of course, that talking about grapevine age, we need to take in mind that a plant does not have a use-by day. So the vineyards, they do have a huge potential also for biodiversity. And depending on the age of the vineyard, we have different opportunities to manage these vineyards, and older ones are probably lacking mechanization, therefore may stay longer in life compared to others which are heavily treated by or impacted by machines. And therefore, the decision replacing a vineyard, of course, depends on many factors. And KHALIL, he will now continue on the impact of the vine age itself.
Right, thank you, Manfred. Yes, so as Manfred just said, so you can move to the next slide. A grapevine does not have a use-by date, but how long can a grapevine last? And if we look around and if we see in the kind of the record of oldest grapevine, this is the current record holder. It's a grapevine, it's a Blauer Kölner plant in Slovenia, in the village of Maribor. And this grapevine specifically has been in paintings dating from, I believe, more than 300 years old. So grapevines do live for a long time if allowed to. And can you move to the next slide, please? And we have so far, starting with 1992, a little bit of research on the question of grapevine age. So it's not very clear on the graphic. Okay, maybe, thank you. If you click on the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So here we have, if you look at the bottom, this is the experiment that was done by colleagues in Australia, Greg et al. They looked at grapevines from 6 years old all the way until 168 years old. And this is currently the highest age difference in any, let's say, research done on old grapevines. But if you look at other research that was done, can you please change? Yes. We have in this experiment from Canada, let's say Ontario, the young vines that were 4 years old and the old vines that were 14 years old. And if you look at the first experiment, which was done in Tunisia, we have 13 to 50. So in this sense, the old vine in the Canadian experiment was the young vine in the experiment done by Tunisia. So when I started my PhD, it was very surprising to see that the research was so disparate and so, let's say, varied in terms of ages. Not just in terms of ages, but also in terms of conclusions. Next slide, please. So here we have at the top two experiments that showed that old vines with time they had a lower vigor and a lower fruit set, let's say, and lower yield. But in the third experiment, the one done in Switzerland by Zuffray and Maigre, in this case, we had a higher pruning mass for older grapevines. And this was the same in our case and in the case of the last experiments on this graphic, the grape experiment. Next slide. So not just in terms of vigor, we also had differences in terms of seasons. So in some seasons, old grapevines produced wines that were, let's say, slightly more appreciated or more vegetal in this case and vegetal in the next vintage. And then we also had differences according to the planting site. So whether they were planted, depending on the vineyard in which they were planted. So next slide, please. Our experiment in Geisenheim is a bit different because it has 3 different grapevine ages, as you can see in this picture. So we have the young vines planted in 2012, the vines, middle vines planted in 1995, and the eldest vines, so the original vines in this vineyard planted in 1971. It's the same clone and same rootstock, and we have 2 pruning systems, so the double guyot and the single cordon. Can you change, please? Yeah. So this is a picture from the beginning of the experiment, and I'm showing it to you because there are 2 important things to mention. The first that you will notice is that for young vines, we do not see any cover crop. This is normal. This is because usually when you establish a new vineyard, you would like your grapevines to have a higher chance of survival. So you try to reduce competition with them. And this is why we did not have cover crop for young vines at the very beginning of the experiment. And then the second thing that you can notice, but it's a bit more difficult, is that if you look at the picture in the middle, you see that the shadow of the grapevine, of the canopy, is constant all the way on the row. But if you look left and right, you see that in old vine rows, we have a few empty places. So because those were grapevines that died over time and that we did not replace. And in the last picture, you have grapevines that are too small and that produce a relatively thin canopy. Next slide, please. So now, looking at physiology, I've already started talking about it. Next slide. This was the impact of the lack of cover crop. So in the first seasons where we did not have any cover crop in young vines, for young vines, we had a high nitrate concentration in these rows. But then starting 2016, once the cover crop was also planted in young vine rows, this is where we started seeing an equivalent, let's say, nitrate concentration in the soil. So this for us was very good because at this stage, the 3 were in the same situation. Next slide. Yes, we also looked at water stress in the sense that we would think that young vines, because they have a smaller root system, they would be more sensitive to water stress or water deficit. And this we tried to reproduce in the field outside. So Germany is not really dry as a country. So we tried to artificially create stress by putting, as you can see on the right, some covers, also some mulch on the ground so that the water doesn't go through. And in the graphic on the left side, the more negative the bar is, the more stress the plant experiences. Now, even though these values are not very low, they can be much lower than this, we saw that there is a trend for young vines to be a little bit more stressed than vines either planted in 1995 or the old ones in 71. Next slide. Now, the big question about grapevine age is about productivity. And it's quite common for, let's say, people to think that old vines produce less grapes, and because they produce less grapes, they should be more valuable. But as Thomas said in the previous presentation, a big factor in this experiment that we did was wood diseases. So we had a lot of old vines that died over time from ESCA, for example. And you can see on in the pie charts on the right, the percentage of living and healthy grapevines at the end of the experiment. So 65% of the old vines were left at the end, and 30% missing, 5% with ESCA symptoms. For vines planted in 1995, we had 93, so almost everything. And then only just 3% of ESCA and 4 missing vines. And young vines, we only had a couple that didn't survive when they were planted, but the rest was all there. Next slide. And this was the result of our yield per grapevine. 2014 was the first vintage for young vines, so you can see the yield is extremely low. But if you look at the two other groups, the vines planted in 1995 and 1971, you see that the bars are usually similar. 2016, old vines, or the eldest vines, were a little bit less productive, but then this trend was the opposite in 2017. So yeah, from this point of view, and it was not clear, let's say, that there was any change in productivity between the healthy old vines and the vines planted in 1995. So next slide. So yes, if you hear about old vineyards producing less than they should, ask yourself, so next slide please. Why? So is it because the vineyard looks like this? Okay. So next slide. Berry composition. So now we move on to what's inside our berries. So next slide. And here I decided not to show, because I mean it's a lot of data, but just focusing already on the nitrate or the nitrogen in the berries. Again, because of the story with the cover crop, you see that in 2014 and 15 we have much more nitrogen in the berries of young vines, but then in 2016 and 17 this trend completely changed. And it was also very interesting to see that there was no significant differences, let's say, or clear differences between in terms of Brix, pH, and total acidity among the whole trial. Next slide. So yeah, it's fine, thank you. Now, in terms of aromas, and this is where it gets maybe more interesting, we have two classes of aromas that we studied in this case, the monoterpenes and the norisopreneurs. Monoterpenes, they're typical aromas from Riesling, fruity aromas like linalool and so on, and the others, TDN, this is the most important aroma in Riesling, the kerosene aroma. This comes from the degradation of carotenoids with light. So the young vines that had the thinnest canopy, remember from the first picture, because their canopy was quite thin, those were the ones that were expressed or exposed to more light in the berries. And this is why maybe we had this high increase in TDN for young vines. And then for the other two treatments, there were some significant differences, but not, let's say, for the monoterpenes. Next slide. So finally, wine analysis. Next slide. We did a relatively big descriptive analysis in 2017 with the wines from 14 to 16. We had 13 panelists and we trained them during 8 sessions on those wines, and then 3 repetitions. So next slide. And we tested all those attributes that are usually typical of Riesling. So citrus, peach, and so on, aging, and we've had a few more at the end, so vegetal reductive and burnt rubber. And then we had some taste like sourness and sweetness and so on. And this is a PCA, a principal component analysis on the right. I'm going to explain a bit the way it looks. I don't really see the points from the young vines, but it's hopefully it's going to be clear. So next slide. If we look on the left and right side of the big vertical line, we see that the ripe attributes like peach, aging aroma, sweetness, and dry fruit, they're all clustered together on the right side. And on the left side, you see the green attributes like sourness, citrus aroma, rose, and so on. So this is how the attributes got separated in this analysis. If we look at the wines, so next slide, please. Yeah, one, yes, correct, yeah. We have on the, so those are the wines from 2014 and 15. In the bubble above, you see the old wine from 2015 and 14, and you see the middle wine, it's complicated, of 2015. Now, the equivalent for 2014 for the middle vines is at the bottom. This wine was quite specific. I don't know if it was because of the winemaking, but it was clearly one wine that was like an outlier. And if, could you zoom in again, if possible? Yes, thank you. And on the right side, you have the two samples, or you have the two wines from young vines, which were quite different because they're so far away from the others that were at the top. So next slide. And this is in 2016. Again, we have the wine from the vines planted in 1971 and those planted in 1995 that are quite close together. And still a bit further away, we have the wine of the youngest grapevines. So throughout the study, the young grapevines were kind of outlying, and then the others clustered together with few exceptions. Next slide. So as a summary, next slide. We've had two stages in this experiment. The first stage where there was no cover crop for young vine rows, and their canopies were quite thin. And this led to a higher sun exposure, and we had a higher amount of nitrogen and water content in the soil. And next slide. So those were kind of intrinsic differentiators and extrinsic differentiators. And throughout the study, we were able to follow these effects all the way from the vineyard to the wine. And then next slide. The second part of the experiment, so when we had the cover crop with the young vines, this is where we started seeing the young vines slowly become closer and closer in terms of productivity and in terms of wine sensory to the other two groups. But the most interesting thing is that between the vines planted in 1971 and the plants planted in 1995, this is where we did not really have any differences. So this is the question about old vines that is a bit difficult to answer. Next slide. And so again, it's important to manage external factors, just like Thomas said before. So like you see in this picture, if you are able to protect your grapevines over time, there should be no reason why they would produce less. And it was a very good news for us that even over time, the sensory profile of the two eldest groups, were quite similar. Okay, next slide. So yes, climate change is an external factor, and this is the last slide of the presentation that Manfred is going to talk about. So next slide, please.
Okay, so there are many questions to be answered and many risk factors to be faced. Well, Thomas, he did in part start with breeding programs, but extreme weather conditions, of course, are also threatening our management and our vineyards. And new pests and pathogens, they did arrive already. And certainly wine profile, which is different to what we normally describe as in wine quality, will need to be considered as one important graft out of the vineyard. So therefore, we would like to open the chat and answer questions.
Yes,
And
we thank you so much. We have a couple of questions and I have one for you as well before we go to the next speaker, but this is a good one here. So someone is asking, based on my experience, most vineyards are replaced all at once. I'm not sure if it's done because it's the way it's always been done, or if there's been some studies done that show new vines planted to be replaced. Hold on. So they're wondering basically why is the, you know, in his knowledge, most vineyards are replanted at once. Why is that? Is it based on studies? Is it because of vine competition from new vines to old vines, or it's just a financial consideration?
Okay, thank you for that good question. Well, first of all, our experimental side is different from what we used to do in practice. However, normally it's correct that vineyards are entirely uprooted, but the replanting should occur over the lifespan of a vineyard. And at the final end, of course, it will be of importance to maintain some homogeneity in the vineyard, that you do not have a lot of gaps in between the vines. And if you replace right from the beginning, every third or fourth year, some of the vines, certainly your entire vineyard will stay more homogeneous, and therefore it probably doesn't need to be uprooted at all, or it can be postponed. And normally you need about 7 years to have a return in terms of the payment, the investment, if you replant in an existing vineyard, because it takes longer to train that vine because of the competition, in particularly of the light situation between the ones grown at the ground and the mature ones that are already up in the supporting system of the wires.
And if I may add to that, I did a little interview with Johannes Selbach that you can watch on the Instagram of Tasting Climate Change. We were talking about ESCA, how ESCA is, you know, they haven't seen ESCA before in Germany and now they're seeing it. He was saying, to your point, that the old vines actually are better equipped they actually seem to do better. And he was saying that he doesn't replant all at once just to maintain an old vine vineyard, the average older. He's replant, you know, when the vine is finally dies, he just replants that vine rather than, and it's kind of a way to make sure that he keeps the average age of his vineyards old.
It's not just the age, it's also a crop yield, Otherwise it dramatically declines.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go on, I cannot go to the next speaker without quickly, because we have other speakers, but can you talk, and I know this is a big topic, but just maybe a few words about the FACE program, because I think it's quite fascinating.
Okay, FACE is the abbreviation for free air carbon enrichment. And what we do here at Geisenheim is we basically predict the future carbon dioxide concentration of 2050 by an enrichment of 20%, which is predicted for mid of century. And the carbon dioxide sort of feeds the plant, stimulates the photosynthesis and therefore the productivity. And what we did find out through another project of another PhD student, Yvette Wohlfahrt, is that the productivity in terms of, first of all, biomass production is increased. The vines, they do use up more water. They end up with larger berries and an increase in yield on the same sugar content than our control, which is under ambient conditions currently here of about 415 parts per million as the ambient concentration. So that is pretty exciting stuff. However, again, it depends on the adaptation of the vines as well. We started the experiment about 10 years ago, almost, and the behavior tends to change. So what we see above ground, the biomass production is quite obvious. What happens below ground is basically the black box that is hidden. And so far, we do not have a lot of knowledge in general about root development, storage capacity, allocation of reserves, and these things that we are investigating in future.
Yeah.
And is there, like, for people like me who are kind of obsessed with those research, is there any way we can go and read further about some of the research you've done?
Yeah, we can forward links or papers if
that
you
would
like.
be fantastic, and I will share it with the attendees.
We will do that.
That'll be great.
Yeah, there's also one question in the chat regarding one of the graphs. I guess this is the graph of Smart and Robinson,
Yes.
which we can also forward the link.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we'll come back. There's a few more questions that are coming. I do want to make sure that every speaker get their time, so we'll come back. But thank you so much. I could talk to you all day. It's so much more questions and things to discuss, but thank you. We'll be back.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you. So the next speaker, Gonzaga SANTESTEBAN, he will talk about his research with indigenous grapes in Spain and the future of those grapes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, that's me. I'm a professor in the Public University of Navarra in Spain. If you don't know where Pamplona is, you can go to the next slide and see the most famous thing we have here in Pamplona. So I'm sure you have seen all around the world this. And if we go to this one, I will give an extra point of where Navarra is. This is me in the Middle Ages. Okay, and Navarra is that small red part between Castilla and Aragon. So we were a small kingdom, and there was we are making our research. First of all, as Michel indicated, I would like to introduce a little bit the ADVICLIM project. Next slide, please. ADVICLIM project is a European project that we developed within the LIFE program with several research centers all around Europe. And in this project, we evaluated different strategies to adapt to grapevine to climate change. Our idea was not to be like too dramatic, but try to be realistic and to evaluate the tools that we have to face climate change. As a part of that research, we conducted, next slide please, some questionnaires where we inquired growers on which were their perception on the climate change existence or not, the influence that had in viticulture, and also in the forecast or the perspective for the future. Okay, in this small research, we obtained, next slide please, several perceptions. In this graph you can see the perception from France and from New Zealand. In the highest the bar, the highest the priority for adaptation of the growers to climate change. So you can see there that there are different perceptions, of course, between France and New Zealand. For example, with irrigation, if you can see over there, irrigation was not even very little considered in France, but was one of the highest priority options in New Zealand. And in the first three column groups, you can see the role of plant material, varieties, rootstocks, and clones. Okay, so we can see that there is a certain consideration of plant material of varieties or rootstocks as an option to adapt to climate change. Next slide, please. In in this slide, we can see in one of the papers we obtained from this project, where we observe the perception in northern France for the adaptation strategies that there should be adopted to face to climate change. And for me, it was quite surprising that irrigation was only the only one that was like a longer term choice for than grapevine varieties. Okay, so growers in some regions, probably in the most traditional regions, do not think that changing varieties is like a first priority question. However, if we go to the next slide, we can see in the next, please. What happened? This is the historic truth. Okay, I will not go to the detail of the graphics, but this is a paper that was recently published by some researchers in France that showed how the climatic crisis that had happened along history in 1500 years were faced with a variety change. Okay, when the small ice age came, they changed the varieties, and when a warm period came, they changed the varieties. Okay, so I will speak a little bit about the origin of varieties. If we go to the next slide, please. I would like to clarify some concepts. That is, all varieties, a variety comes from a seed, from a single seed. Okay, so if we go to the next one and we go to the example of Tempranillo, one of the most emblematic varieties in Spain, it's the crossing of Albillo Mayor and Benedicto. Okay, you can see there the crossing. And what we need to have clear, next slide, please, is that all the Tempranillo plants around the world come from a single seed, from a single plantlet that was multiplied. Next slide. I apologize for with my math professor because there's 1 0 missing. So now we have like nearly 7 billion plants of Tempranillo all around the world, alive now. And all of them, they come from one single seed and from one little plantlet. Okay, so this is a good idea on the intentionality of the growers when they chose the varieties. Okay, next slide, please. We have, of course, information of the origin of many varieties. This is a poster that you can find online with the pedigrees of some varieties, and we are more and more aware of the origin of many varieties. Okay, and in the last time, next slide, please, we have experienced 3 major near extinction of varieties. The first one was very clear and well known, was associated to phylloxera crisis. Okay, because there was a need for replanting and varieties changed. The second one was the nursery production. Okay, nurseries have done a fantastic work, but of course contributed to certain homogenization of varieties. But the last one is the one that concerns me more, is the one of fashion. Okay, we change in many places varieties due to fashion. Okay, Chardonnay is a good variety for all over the world. This is a bit insane for me. Concerning varieties, I think we have made in the last 3 decades a very nice work. Next slide, please. Here you have some of the teams that are working in recovering ancient varieties throughout Spain. There are a lot of programs, and I think we did a very good effort, and most varieties or many varieties have been saved. Okay, next slide, please. I'm very proud of this paper that we published just this week with the recovery of a variety that was only observed in Pamplona area, in our city, in a peri-urban area. I think it's the first recovery of a variety in a peri-urban area that was only found there, but it's clearly a variety. Okay, and if we go back to varieties, next slide, you remember this, and with my math mistake, what happened since we obtained the first plantlet of Tempranillo? Okay, next slide. We have an increase in the intra-variety variability. As Thomas explained, there is a lot of variability that has been originated along centuries because some small mutations occur and variability increases. At the same time, next slide, please, that we have the extinction or the near extinction of some varieties. Next slide, please. We also have some decline in the intra-variety variability. Okay, partly because of phylloxera, partly because of the nursery process, and particularly due to clonal selection. Next slide, please. Clonal selection consists of going to all vineyards and to take the best plants, the supposedly best plants for your needs, and multiplying them vegetatively, which is the problem, that if we are taking the variability from the existing old vineyards, but we are making homogeneous vineyards nowadays, we have no place to go to take that variability. Next slide, please. Fortunately, there is a great interest in around the world in the last years. This is the resolution of the OIV 2 years ago for the polyclonal selection process. That this consists of gathering the variability, intra-variety variability, and then analyzing and then multiplying and transferring that variability, but without losing it. Okay, next slide. This is a very good example that I would like you to watch. The Basajaun is a recently released short documentary where a lot of work done with this from many wineries in Spain is described. Okay, and I think it's a good opportunity to follow that process in Spain. It has English and French subtitles, so I think it's worth the time. Next, please. So the last question: what can we do? Okay, we can go to fashion as wine drinkers. Okay, now Grenache is fashion. Now white Grenache is like the fashion. But next slide. If we want to preserve this vineyard, or next slide, please. If we want to preserve this kind of vineyard that are the essence of the Mediterranean viticulture, we cannot do that. Next slide. We cannot go from one fashionable thing to another one or to another one, and just because it's in fashion, because we are going against that diversity, because growers will finish those vineyards because they are not in fashion. Okay, if we are good wine drinkers or responsible wine drinkers, next slide, please, we should at least use as many colors, as many options as the one in the picture. We need a lot of diversity because this is the only way we have to preserve this variability. Okay, next slide. I know Michel wants to know my opinion of the hybrids. The hybrids for me are something like that can be very convenient for a certain moment, very good clothes, very nice, very comfortable, but probably they are not the answer for a diverse and a sustainable viticulture for the future. And that's everything. Next slide. Thank you and for your questions.
Thank you very much. I think what I'm going to do, Gonzaga, is I'm going to go to Marta, and then we can come back and have like questions, because I think what she's going to talk about it's a bit the continuation of what you just talking, which is indigenous grapes. I think they've been champion of indigenous grapes at Paris Valta. And then I just want to let everyone know we might go 5 minutes over. I just want to make sure that we do leave time for question for the panelists and have everyone. So if you could bear with me, we're probably going to run 5 minutes late. Thank you, Gonzaga, and I'll be back with you at the end. So please stay on. Marta, you know, I've talked a lot to the family at Paris Valta over the years about the work that you do, and you really promote indigenous grapes. And I know that you really believe in those grapes for the future. So I thought it was important to hear a producer's perspective on all of those research being done.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And it's for me a pleasure to be here and to explain our experience with the local varieties, these ancestral varieties that we work over this 20 years ago with the family. If you can put the the presentation, I can explain the introduction. Yes, the next, please. We are Perez Balta family, here all involved into the winery, and the two brothers, Josep, my husband, and Joan, my brother-in-law, are managing the winery, and the two wives, me and Maria Elena, we are the winemakers. So please, the next. Here, women are important, and we are the third generation with new ideas, with new projects, and with these new projects, we have these local varieties that we are working. Next, please. And for see the location where we are in Spain, as Gonzaga was in Navarra, we are just a little bit on the right side of Spain, in Barcelona, near Barcelona, South Barcelona, 50 kilometers south, with the appellation Penedès and Cava, the sparkling wine. Next, please. And here you can see the 5 states, the 5 vineyards that we have, and the main and the most important thing that we are in different locations, different microclimates and different altitudes. So you can see here just near, close to the sea, we have La Torreta state, that's for red grapes. Then it comes Perez Balta state, that's surrounding the cellar. We have these vineyards. In right hand, the Pujols with the foothills, and Calmiret as well, that we are just going up to the mountain. And the upper part, 750 meters of altitude, where we have the steep slopes, the terraces with these varieties, the ancestral varieties that we have this experience to plant there. These plants, these vines, that we have these experiences all these years. Next, please. Here you can see the forest, the mountains, and the river. We have this little river. So these conditions, these geographical features are very important to mitigate the climate change that we are observing, the ripening process of these varieties that are with long cycle, vegetative cycle, and they are well adapted to this microclimate that's with high altitude, with this humidity of the diurnal range. That's the difference of the temperature day and night, that there in the upper part it's bigger, so the ripening process is better. And for this humidity that the river brings, that's perfect for mitigate the stress, the hydric stress in the leaves only, because in the summer, you know, here in Spain, we achieve very high temperatures that we can see in the next slide, if you can change. Yes, here you can see the different altitudes to have the idea of this distance of the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the effect of these cold breezes that we have in summer to provide this little humidity to the leaves and resist the sensation of the heat wave that usually we have in the harvests. This year we had in 2021 harvest, we had very hard heat wave, but then with the rainfall that it came in September, we had a good ripening process. So please change. Here you can see the indicators that just these years with the analysis of temperature and rainfall, we have this increasing in temperature, and it's the problem that we have here with the harvest, that always every year we are seeing that the harvest is earlier, and with these high temperatures we need to work very hard to have decisions to harvest in the middle August or final August. That's not normal. We prefer to harvest in September or final September, and we are observing with the ancestral varieties, the indigenous varieties, we are achieving this and planting in the altitude. Next, please. Here you can see the indicator of rainfall that little by little is less. Depending on the year, we have a little bit of drought, and then some years like 2020, we had very high amount of rainfall that was terrible for the fungus attack of mildew. Here in the region was a disaster. And here it's the thing that we need to prevent with new plantations in the terraces, in the steep slopes, in the foothills, for having better harvest, better ripening, maturation. And with the next, please. You can see here the local varieties. The most popular varieties that we work are Xarel·lo, that's the iconic variety from Penedès region, Macabeo and Parellada as well for the sparkling wines, that here it's, there are two appellations in the same geographic map. And then with Grenache, that it's the red typical variety from here, that for the phylloxera season, it was lost. And now we are recovering this plant with new plantations that it's the local variety that our grandfathers made good red grapes, good wine, sorry. And with these local varieties, Xarel·lo, Macabeo, Parellada, Grenache, we are working a lot. And with the other, Malvasia, the Sitges, Forcada, Moneu, and White Carignan, these are the new wines that we are working with, and they are very, very interesting to have the authenticity of the region. They were in the past here planted, and for the phylloxera disease, they were lost, and now we are recovering. We have this great, excellent work that with other wineries here, we had, for example, with Miguel Torres Winery, that they had this research with Forcada and with Moneu, these two varieties that have long cycle, and we can harvest them in October. That's fantastic for the ripening process of them, and with a good balance with acidity and sugars. That's the most important thing. We have this good balance with these wines. We can achieve these varieties that are well adapted into the Mediterranean climate, and we have less intervention in winemaking. So it's very, very important to work with these varieties that have this long cycle, this vegetative cycle, and we can achieve this freshness into the wines. As White Carignan. White Carignan is typical from the north of Catalonia, but we have an experience with a plot with this. That's good wine for aging in bottle, and it's another time with high acidity and low sugar, so perfect for this good balance in this fresh wines. And Malvasia, the Sitges, the same. It's typical from the village of Sitges, that's in the coast. Here, just 12 kilometers far from the winery. I'm now in the winery. And Malvasia, the Sitges brings this freshness, this intense aromas of tropical fruit and good acidity. So these varieties are the most important varieties that now we are working with. Please, the next. And with organic farming, another thing that's important to mitigate this climate change, and these varieties in the upper part of the mountains with the cover crop, with the animals, with these treatments that we use, nettle, we use chamomile, we use horsetail infusions like a tea to treat the diseases to the vines. So here it's another key factor to mitigate the climate change. The ancestral varieties, the organic and biodynamic agriculture, and with these wines that are well balanced to have less work in winemaking in the cellar. So next, I think it's the last. Yes, here the bottles that we make these revolution wines. Next, please. And these new things that we are experimenting with these glass carboys, the amphoras, these open barrel fermentations that we are working a lot about the less intervention without non-sulfite added in the wines. So here another thing to mitigate the climate change. And next, please. And I invite you, all the attendants, all the audience, if one day they can travel, come to Spain and pay a visit, and we can see these terraces, these steep slopes to see the landscape of Penedès and Cava region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marta. Before we go on to everyone for some of the panel question, I'm just curious. I know that a lot of the new grapes like Forcata and are good because they're retaining the acidity despite the rise in temperature. But I also know, for example, in the Penedès region, in the last couple of years, a lot of producers lost a huge amount of crop to mildew. Like I've talked to some producers who lost up to 60%, and they all in organic and biodynamic. So how do you find those indigenous grapes resisting to those diseases? And are you still betting on them, or are you still kind of trying to edge your bet and look at different options?
The case of 2020 harvest was terrible, and I hope, I cross fingers, that it don't came another time. But with the local varieties, it's a good adaptation to the climate, to the Mediterranean climate. So it's important to see this, important to work with the cover crop, because the fungus disease are beginning in the soil, then are coming up to the plant. So it's another thing to work with cover crop. And then with the normal attack of mildew, that's another harvest that was with a little bit of mildew was 2018. We solved with the horsetail infusions and nettle with a little bit of copper solution. That's the caldo bordelés. So it's the normal treatment that the farmers use, but with a mix with nettle infusion and horsetail, what's a good solution to reduce the copper application in the soil and to mitigate the mildew disease. So this is the future of Penedès region, that little wine growers are working with biodynamics, with organic agriculture, and the appellation Penedès is focused in it. The last 15 years ago, the president of the appellation was working with this very, very hard. And I'm a teacher here teaching the farmers how to work with biodynamics, with these preparations, with compost as well, with animals, and with this cover crop. That's very, very important to look at. And it's the new thing to mitigate these diseases.
Thank you. I have a question, and I'm asking the technical team here if we could put everyone on the screen. Thank you. I don't know, Thomas, you're still there? Thomas, t'es encore là? I don't know. I think we lost him. But I'm just curious. One of the challenge with climate change is the wine industry is very fragmented. So sometimes there's a lot of research, let's say at Geisenheim and with Adviclim, and then there's the producer, you know, trying to deal with the outcome of climate change. I'm just curious, and you know, whoever feels like answering, go. But what's put in place for the research center like Geisenheim, let's say, and you know, and share those finds, those research, so that the producer can use it and have the resources to yeah, I'm just curious how that coordination between the producer and the research is working.
Okay, of course, first of all,
yeah,
thanks, Michelle. We first of all, through education and through training next generation, of course, we already have a huge impact in the future industry. Secondly, there is a lot of collaboration happening with industry, and the transformation also goes in the way back. So once growers do discover things where they believe this is worth looking at deeper, we pick up those projects as well and follow them. And therefore, there is a lot of interaction, and we are not sitting in an ivory tower. It is certainly a good exchange between all parties.
Here, related with this, sorry.
In my opinion, is that gap is a question of mainly of the past. Of course, there is a lot of work to do, but I think wineries that are working well are in contact with researchers, and researchers that are working well are in contact with wineries. Of course, there are exceptions everywhere, but I think that gap is getting smaller and smaller. Probably in the past, people in the winery were like a very, very field fixed, but not with the ability of reading scientific papers. But now it's like a more fluid thing. So I think that gap is not a big issue. Of course, we need to work in transfer, but I think we are, both sides, we are doing quite well.
Marta?
Here in Penedès, we have a good net of relationship between different wineries. So here we have an important winery, Miguel Torres, that they have a great research center, and they have a lot of research. They communicate this, and here we are very amount of wine growers and little wineries that are interested in this. And the appellation approved these two varieties, the Forcada Moneo that I explained just last year. And some growers, some farmers planted these plants, these vines, and seeing these new wines that we are looking to see in the near future, how they are developing in the bottle, how they're developing in different kind of aging in barrel or not, without, depending on the style. Sometimes ones of them are in sparkling. So it's interesting to have this good relationship with the colleagues and this great big one that we have here.
Thank you. And is there any research, if I'm talking to Manfred, KHALIL, and Gonzaga, are there any research in the pipeline, more research to help growers adapt? Are they something else you're working on right now?
Of course there is, yes.
I know.
And you can basically split it in adaptation strategies where we reply on a seasonal basis, so from year to year, through in particularly canopy management practices in existing vineyards. However, long-term strategies, as in part covered through that session, of course, will then be also of importance. And what we certainly are also still working on, and which requires work in the future, will be also to continue on work on training systems. So what we have developed, of course, is perfectly suitable to mechanization, but probably not always to the best of the vines in terms of the training practices. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I
Go
like
ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out some research on replacing pesticides with more natural alternatives. That it's quite popular, not popular. Like there's a lot of interest for this right now, and as Marta would tell us as well, like this is a field of increasing interest.
Which is
political
exciting.
pressure through the Green Deal.
Sorry, Manfred?
And a lot of political pressure through the Green Deal, suiting all the SDGs of the UN.
Interesting. Gonzaga?
Yeah, I wanted to point out a couple of things after your question. First, that of course we have a climate emergency. The climate change is an emergency, but from the grapevine sector or the wine sector, we don't need to be in a real hurry. We need to make good decisions, okay? Because as I tried to say in my talk, we cannot go back in time. We need to keep the varieties, to keep doing things well. And I think we need to think very well the decisions we make. And sometimes we are like forced by the politicians to change a lot of things. And I think we need to change them, but at the right pace, not slowly, of course, but not too fast. Okay, we should not be the fastest ones. And the second thing regarding to new research, I would also like to highlight the relevance of pruning and grafting research related to grapevine trunk diseases. Okay, here it appeared in several communications, and of course the fungi have been around for a long time, but we forgot the good ways of pruning. We forgot the relevance of a good connection in the grafting, and we need to have healthy vineyards to face climate change. Okay, so when a vineyard is weak because it has bad connections due to bad pruning or bad grafting, it will have problems when a dry year comes. Okay, and fungi will arise. So this is a very important part of research that is surprisingly very new, because in the last 10 years, yes, but not before. Nothing was done before, had been forgotten for 100 years. And this is a very, very relevant question, and I would like to recommend everyone to look at that, grafting and pruning.
I think what you're saying, and I think Thomas, est-ce que tu es toujours là?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so we cannot see you.
What a few words about grafting, because it's our DNA. Let's say we say that grape growers are their own responsibility in the in the bad state of the vineyard, but also nurseries, and that's why we decided to use as much as no intensive practice. For instance, we released our rootstocks. We don't use herbicide. We use English graft. We don't use omega graft, because omega graft is like a high intensive way of doing. People are paid for the number of grafts they do per hour. So it's not a way of, in our opinion, it's not a way of doing. So the connection, as Gonzaga say, is not well done in this kind of practice. So we rather use slow, intensive practice in our nursery. We also use heat treatment water because we want healthy plants. We don't want low vigor plants. It has to grow as much as possible, not with an excess of vigor, because the rootstock cannot be right chosen. But we want plants that grow well. That's the condition to fight against climate change, but also biotic aggressions and so on that we unfortunately have to deal now. That's why we make an effort in our practice in the nursery, but also in our selection. As Marta says, there are a lot of regional varieties that has to be enhanced all over the world. That's why we would rather, instead of planting Merlot in Galicia or in Portugal, it's better to plant their own local varieties, which are more adapted, in our opinion.
That's great. I think it's a great way to finish. You know, I think it's inspiring to be talking to all of you. I love, you know, the most beautiful thing about drinking a wine from a region is that you have a feeling that you're drinking that place, that typicity. And, you know, I don't want to lose my German Riesling, and I don't want to lose my Garnacha. And I think it's the work you're doing is fantastic. And throughout the presentation, you know, you all kind of shared some information. You will be sending me some links, and what I'll do is I have a newsletter for attendees, and I will make sure that I share some of those links and research paper that they can read and follow your research, because I know that we just got a glimpse of what you're doing, and there's a lot of questions we did not answer, but we look forward to following your work, and it's encouraging to see that some of the people are really fighting this diversity to keep the sense of place of those countries. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much again for attending. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time for the 4th day of Tasting Climate Change. I want to thank the generous sponsor, Wines from Spain and Wines of Germany, for making this seminar possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Bye.